Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. We're pleased to be here. Over the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to try to hit on two major topics. Of course, the reason you came here today is you read the name of the presentation. Is the media the enemy? And we're going to try to convince you that they are not. We're going to talk about crisis communication. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to be applicable not just in a crisis, but it's going to be applicable Monday through Friday. It's going to be applicable in the station house. It's going to be applicable on scene. It's going to be applicable in dispatch. It's going to be applicable at home. Got some funny anecdotes about that. But we're going to do it in two parts. John is going to talk to you about some of the amazing stuff that's being taught now at the MBA program, the business school down at Texas A&M University about communications. You know, how do we do this effectively? And I'm going to be talking about some of the things to consider in a crisis when you're dealing with the media. And I'm going to try today to convince you that the media is not the enemy. And if I'm successful, I'd like a couple of you at the end come up here and let me know if I changed your mindset just a little bit. John?
Thanks, Brian. Howdy. It's great to be here. Is this thing working? Yeah, I guess it is. Love to talk about communication. I have a real passion for this. One of the reasons I have a passion for it is because I know that it is a topic that when you really press people on, everyone pretty much agrees it's critical. It's absolutely critical. And yet, how often do we really work on our communication skills? It's sort of odd. And so my job at A&M is teaching MBA students, executive MBA students, and professional MBA students, as well as a lot of executives who come through our executive development programs, to be better business writers, better public speakers. But as I'll talk about a little more today, I take that a little further, because I think effective communication is about so much more than the words you say. And so before Brian gets into some really excellent practical advice on crisis communication and dealing with the media, I'd like us to start by having a little conversation just about the communication process itself, and kind of have a renewed look at, wait a minute, how do we do this, and what does it involve? A little bit of theory, and then we'll go to the practical advice with Brian, I think. But I want to start with a little quiz. I'm going to put something up on the screen here, and I would like you to raise your hand as soon as you see the arrow. Some people still not seeing it. All right, let me show it to you. You ready? Okay. All right, so this is going to come up again a little later, so just file that away. We're here to talk about communication. Is it important? You already know, I've already revealed my hand. You know that I think it's critical. What do you think? Is this important in your world? Why? Exchange of information? Public demand? Pardon me? It definitely impacts your job and how well you do it on a daily basis. You know, I talk to my students and say ineffective communication in their world can mean lost revenues, wasted time. In your world, it could mean lives, right? You have an incident, and you're doing an after-action review or a hot wash. What do you say typically could have been better? Is it the equipment? Were there equipment failures? Was there not enough training? Communication. 99% of the time. It's really remarkable. It is so important, and yet we don't spend that much time in really improving the way we communicate and thinking about how to do it better. So, that's what we're about here.
John?
Yes.
I'd like to ask a question.
Please.
How many of you all think you're a good communicator? Don't raise your hands, just how many of you think you're a good communicator? What would your spouse say if I asked them? All right, I wanted to
thank you.
To frame this up. We all think we're good at communication, don't we? Well, some of us won't admit to being too good at it. A lot of us think we're good at communication. We think we're very articulate.
Yeah. So I just want to ask you, how does anything get done? You think about it. How does anything get done without talking? Planning? Organizing? Resolving disputes? managing employees. These days, managing a web presence. Reporting to the various kinds of stakeholders, from your boss to the media, you name it, all the various kind of stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Without effective communication, nothing gets done. Or worse, the wrong thing gets done. Now, with all this in mind, I want to ask you to really try to step back and take a fresh look at this thing we call communication. How does it work? How do we do it? And let's talk about talking rather than writing for now. How does this process work? I want to communicate something to you. How do I do it? Pardon me? Verbally, but how do we do that? I mean, from a really basic point of view. You have a speaker and a listener. And if you remember, there's an old communication model of two kind of talking heads. You have the speaker who encodes the idea in a message. You have the receiver who listens and gets the message, right? Is that how we do it? Okay, let's think about that model a little bit. So this guy gets an idea, and he encodes it in a message, and poof, like magic, the same idea, the exact same idea pops up in this other guy's head, right? No, why not? Personal experiences, what's that? His vision might be different. But man, my words were clear. Did you not understand my message? I mean, right? Here's a little joke for this. What we say to dogs. Okay, Ginger, I've had it. You stay out of the garbage, Ginger. Understand? Stay out of the garbage or else. What do dogs hear? Blah, 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 Ginger. Blah, 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 Ginger. Blah. I don't think it's just dogs and men. I think that it's people, right? We have different orientations. We have different assumptions. We have different agendas. We even have different definitions for words. Now, on a real basic level, it works pretty well on a daily basis, right? But anytime you start introducing any complexity at all, we could even have slightly different definition of what a word means, and that could start causing problems. When we did this presentation a few minutes ago and I put the FedEx sign up, one of the guys told me afterwards, I thought you said find the error. Did you think that too? I mean, this communication thing is really hard. I mean, it's really hard. And I submit that it doesn't work more often than it does work. I mean, it works on a sort of an elementary level. But in terms of really getting my idea through to you in a way that you see it the way I do, I think that's a lot more difficult than we typically give it credit for. And what I want to ask you to do is think about that. Really think about how difficult this is. We take it for granted. We talk to each other and just assume we're getting through to each other. It ain't that easy. And probably more often than we all realize, it's not working quite like we think it is. What are some other examples of things that might get in the way of this perfect one-to-one correspondence? Slang words. Amen. You bet. Body language, cultural difference, slang words. What else? You're not listening. Yeah. That's probably more often than not. That's probably what Brian was hinting at with the spouse, right? Two things on listening. One, Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, has a wonderful quote on listening. He says, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Right? I think we're probably all guilty of that. And what happens when you listen with the intent to reply, often you hear a few words and you make assumptions and you're already tuning them out and you're formulating your response in your head. You might even be shaking your head like you're listening, but you're not really. You're formulating your response. And so miscommunication happens. These things happen constantly. And I'm asking you to really stop for a moment and think about, wow, this is tough. Here's some other things that might get in the way. How about gender differences? Maybe. I don't know, slight different orientations of things. This is Harry and Sally. My younger students don't know who they are, but I assume most of you do. So I guess men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Maybe that gives us a slightly different orientation. Who knows? That could get in the way of the communication process sometimes. In my world, the professor says, as you can see, the student, and quite often we experience this. Our students look at us and they shake their heads and they seem to be getting it, and then we test them. Oh, they weren't getting it after all. Excuse me. They weren't getting it after all. If you have kids, you know about this communication problem that we all have. Here's a mom, and she says, "Where have you been? Your father and I have been worried sick about you." Now, that's a pretty clear message. There's no ambiguous terms there. Where have you been? She wants to know where she's been, and she wants her to know that her parents were worried about her. She doesn't receive that message. What does she hear? My parents just don't trust me. Entirely different message. And yet the words were crystal clear. And again, what I'm, not to beat this horse too much, but what I'm trying to convey to you and ask you to think about is just get a renewed sense for how difficult this process is. It's really hard. Fire chief. He says, a fairly common misconception about Generation X firefighters is that they lack loyalty. Young fireman hears, "Are you kidding me? Did the chief just question my loyalty?" No, he didn't, but that's what he heard. So here's one way of thinking about this. I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. That's the communication process more often than not. That's what's really happening. Okay, that's step one. Now, I want to tell you about a book called Made to Stick. Has anyone ever heard of this book? It's by the Heath brothers. We've got one person. Excellent book, isn't it? Fabulous book. What these guys did, these researchers, they collected ideas and things that seem to endure through time, things that stuck, slogans, jokes, urban legends. You know about urban legends? What's that? Snopes is very good at letting us know. Well, how about the urban legend, the razor blade and the apple? Remember that one? The Halloween situation, some evil person embedded a razor blade in an apple. Kid gets the apple, goes home, takes a bite, and you know what happens. This story got so much traction that 2 states actually passed Halloween candy legislation as a result of this story. Never happened. Not a single recorded incident of this actually happened. But it was a powerful story that stuck with people. How about this one? Guy walks into a bar. Attractive woman approaches him and offers to buy him a drink. He's flattered. She buys him the drink. He takes a few sips. And the next thing you know, he wakes up in a bathtub full of ice. If you don't know the story, ask someone who does. I'm not going to explain the story, but again, never happened. It was supposedly a kidney harvesting ring. Yeah, never happened. These things stick. And what the Heath brothers did is they kind of went at it backwards. They collected all these things that endured through time, and then they analyzed them and said, can we sort of pull out characteristics that they seem to share, and then take our ideas when we're communicating something that we really want to stick and sort of use those things. One was an element of unexpectedness. People tend to remember when you kind of give them something unexpected, like the arrow in the FedEx. And another one was concrete. If you give them something in a concrete way where they can actually see it, as opposed to sort of an abstraction, and there's where you have to be careful with your terms. You use too many abstract terms, you're not going to have that correspondence. So they looked at all these ideas, wrote this book. It's a fabulous book. I recommend it. But I want to tell you about one moment in the book called the Tappers and the Listeners exercise. This comes out of a PhD dissertation in which this woman took a group, let's say 100 people, broke them into 50 and 50, and she designated half of them as tappers and half of them as listeners. And then she paired them up. And the task was very simple. The job of the tapper was to take a list that they provided them of 10 popular songs that everyone knows. Things like Happy Birthday, Star Spangled Banner. And they literally were to tap out the song. And the listener was going to guess what song it is. So they asked the tappers, somehow they controlled this so the tappers couldn't see the reaction of their listener. Maybe they put a partition up or whatever. Do you think your listener is getting it? Do you think your listener is going to guess the song? How did they reply? 50% said, yeah, they're getting it. They're hearing it. What was the reality? 2.5%. Think about that disparity. 50% expectation, 2.5% result. Why this wild disparity in expectations? Right. If you didn't hear him, he said the tappers hear the song as they're tapping it. They hear it in their head, right? Listener can't hear it. This is what happens in the communication process. And this is what the Heath brothers, one of the things they say that gets in the way of that very simple model are all these assumptions that you make. Because you hear it, you already know it, right? In fact, they call this the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is you forget what it's like to not know what you know. You forget what it's like to not know what you know. I want to give you an example of the curse of knowledge. It's obvious now, isn't it? You can't not see it. And I would wager that at least one person in this room, sometime soon, you're going to be sitting in a car with a friend, and a FedEx truck's going to pull up, and you're going to say, "You ever notice the arrow in the FedEx sign?" And they're going to say no, and you're going to say, "Oh man, how could you look? It's obvious." This is the curse of knowledge. This is why often an expert is the worst person to teach a beginner. Because you're so far removed from that beginner in terms of what they know. You don't know what to assume and what to tell them. This is the communication process more often than not. It's really difficult. So let's review. So far, 1, effective communication is absolutely essential. Nothing gets done effectively without it. By the way, I joke to my colleagues in the business school that I teach the most important topic in the school. And they say, "Come on." I say, "No, listen, I don't care how much accounting you know, or how much finance you know, or how much marketing you know. You could be the world's smartest person, but if you can't communicate it effectively, what good is it?" It's critical, right? Step number 1. Number 2, even though it's critical, all too frequently it doesn't work very well. It doesn't work as well as we are assuming it's working. Why? Because the process itself is deceivingly complex. We walk around with that model, that simple model of sender or receiver, thinking that it's working that way, and it's not. And one of the reasons it doesn't work that way is because of all the assumptions, those hidden assumptions that you don't even realize you have. So with all that in mind, you tell me, how do we do it? I mean, if you really look at this on paper, it almost looks like we can't even do it. We can't even communicate with each other. Something beyond a simple yes or no. How do we do it? How do we overcome all these issues, all these difficulties with the communication process? A lot of times we don't, but we do know that it works. It often works. And everyone in here, you can think of someone in your world who is a really effective communicator. So think about that person. How do they do it? What do they do differently than the rest of us? They seek feedback. They value your opinion. So I'm hearing that they're connected, they're in tune with their audience, and they're demonstrating that they care and they listen. What else? Convey expectations clearly. Anything else? Empathize? Yeah. Again, think about that Stephen Covey quote. Most people don't listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. An effective communicator listens with the intent to understand. It's hard. it's hard to drop your own agenda and really listen to somebody, but I think it's a requirement of effective communication. Did I mention this already, the attention drop, it's often called? I think I did, where you're listening to someone, you hear a few words, and you make assumptions about what they're going to say, and you start formulating your response. This is often the culprit of ineffective communication. So a few ideas for you before I turn it over to Brian to talk about more practical tips about how to deal with the media, and really we can talk about more than that, but a lot of his comments are directed specifically towards crisis communication with the media. Oh, I forgot, I was going to tell you about Warren Buffett. I had the opportunity a few years ago to meet with Mr. Buffett in Omaha. I took a group of MBA students up to Berkshire Hathaway. He invited a few schools up. We were all able to bring some of our students up there to meet with him all day. It was pretty cool. And at one point, Mr. Buffett looked out into the group and he said, when you guys get back to school, I want you to look around your class, and if you could invest in the future earnings of anyone in this room, who would it be? Ask yourself that question. And then ask yourself, if you could sell short the future earnings of anyone in this room, who would it be? And then he said, it may be, but I doubt that that first person you chose, who you want to invest in their future earnings, is the person with the highest IQ in the room. And I doubt that the person you sold short is the person with the lowest IQ in the room. Buffett was, in his typical Omaha folk wisdom way, was making the point that success in the business world is not about IQ. I mean, that's a part of it, but that's just one part of it. It's not just about what you know, how smart you are. It's about all these other intangible things. It's about leadership. It's about connecting with people. It's about communication, right? So some of the things you can do. You can just increase your awareness about how difficult this process is. You will instantly become a better communicator if you really feel yourself with that sense of, this is more challenging than we typically assume it is. 2, don't forget the curse of knowledge. Try to be aware of your own assumptions. Try to be aware of the things that you're taking for granted. Make sure your audience is on board with you. And that's much harder done than said, but you make that effort. Don't forget that it's how you say what you say. There are plenty of studies out there that show that often what people take from when you speak to them, what they take from you, is much, much more than just the words themselves. What is it? It comes from tone of voice. It comes from body language. It comes from eye contact. These things become part of the message. Literally, part of the message. And be aware of your audience. Communication is not what you say. Communication is what is heard. And you may think you are talking in just a really brilliant way. You may be really smart and have lots of excellent words and sentence constructions, but if your audience is not getting it, you're not communicating. So you've got to be aware of the audience. You've got to plug in. You've got to be aware of the fact that we have an amazing ability as human beings. By the way, this is how we get over these problems, is we connect, we get in tune with each other by opening up and listening and paying attention to people. Through eye contact, neuroscientists are figuring out that our brains have an uncanny ability to connect and to get in tune. And they're using phrases like neural Wi-Fi, where we have this weird ability that we never knew was possible, that somehow it's almost a sixth sense. And if you think about people who you know really well, you've been around them a long time, where you can almost anticipate what they're going to say next. It's almost like you're sharing a brain. Or think of sports metaphors, two people who are really in sync, who've played together enough that they know what's going on with each other. Musicians, often their stories about this, how they can sync up. We have this ability, but to do it, you've got to care, you've got to listen, you've got to drop your own agenda and really pay attention, plug into your audience. So the transcript at A&M, the course I teach, and what the administration thinks I teach, the transcript says business communication. And if you asked an administrator, what does Krajicek teach, they would say public speaking and business writing. But what I tell my students on day one that I'm here to teach them is presence. To help you develop your presence. The way you move through the world. The way you interact with people. What impression people have of you when you meet with them. When you walk around these halls out here and you run into each other and talk, what impression do people have of you? What kind of vibe do you have? What kind of energy do you have? What kind of impression do you leave on people? That, I tell my students, is going to be more important to your success than your IQ or how much you know. So that's how we improve our communication, by developing our presence, by paying attention to how we connect with people, what they take from us, what kind of impression we leave on them. And another way to improve your communication is to listen to Brian Smith's excellent practical advice.
Thank you, John. Talk about the curse of knowledge real quick. Something I like to add to that is I work in Disaster City. That's my Monday through Friday job, and urban search and rescue teams come down and train with us in Disaster City. We also do classes across the country. We have a lot of military teams now that are coming in. They're getting into the Homeland response business. They're getting into emergency response. We get the WMD response teams coming in to train with us from all over the country. We're getting the Seaburn teams that come in. We're getting some special operations teams that want to train at Disaster City at night and do some special nuclear training. And I really enjoy the observer controller running these exercises, because what I get to do is the first thing I do is I get a radio from the team that is doing the exercise with us. Put it on my belt, and then I've got my own radio that I communicate with my actors and with the role players. But I get to I get to watch the teams downrange that are working down in Disaster City. Then I get to listen to the radio transmission that makes its way back to headquarters or back to their forward element that's just in the parking line up at the top of Disaster City. And then I get to go up there and I get to sit in the briefings that the command staff does, talking about what they know and what's going on downrange. We'll talk about the curse of knowledge. All the time it comes up, because what's happening downrange and what's appearing in the briefings happening up at headquarters is not always the same. And they're communicating, I'm listening to the communications, good radios, high-tech radios. It's not the radios that are failing. It's not that the person downrange doesn't know what they're doing. It's that communication. It's those problems that happen as that information is getting passed up. And if it goes through multiple people, you begin to see there's a lot of change to the actual message as it ends up at the command staff. So it's something to consider, and always make sure that as you're talking with your folks that they understand what the message is. Don't just let them have their head go north and south and you think that you've communicated absolutely clearly what they need to know. Because sometimes we're all guilty of that, right? We just let our heads go north and south. Did we hear everything that was said? Not always. Okay, so one of the things I'd like to do today, we're going to talk about crisis communication with the media and dealing with the media. How many here, raise your hands, how many have ever said this under your breath or out loud when you're on scene and the media pulls up? Anybody? Yeah, I know I have. 2007, I was asked to be the public information officer for the task force. I hadn't had any training up until that point, and so I decided that I wanted to make sure I could do as good a job as possible. I went to a number of classes about being a public information officer, and I really delved into it, and I soon realized that I had a preconceived notion that the media was the enemy. The media was out to get me. The media was going to fry me. They were going to make me look stupid, and I was going to get fired. Because they always do that, right? They're horrible. They're evil people that just sit in caves and try to come up with a way that they can absolutely skewer you and ruin your career, right? No, that is not the case. The media, if I can have one salient point that y'all take away today, you need to consider this. The media is not the enemy. The media is a tool. They're an incredibly effective tool at getting your message out. And the only way this tool is going to work is if you engage with them. The only way you're going to get your story out is if you give them some information. Not all the information, but some information. Today with social media, with Twitter, with Facebook, with blogs, with folks sending in photos to ICNN and MSNBC, where people on the street are able to send in a story to a news agency, information is traveling literally at the speed of light. And a lot of times the information is getting out before your public information officer even has a chance to put something out. So some of the things I'm going to talk about today, I'm not advocating that every single one of you go back and tell your chief, you know what, I just learned how to talk to the media and I'm going to do it all the time, anytime I can. That's not what I'm advocating for. I want you to consider the media is a tool, and that if you've got permission from your department and you're able to, if the media is on scene and your public information is not there, the PIO is not there, that you can at least do some very limited engagement with them, give them some information And also I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to get them to your public information officer so he or she can then give them the right information. I'll give you an example of why this is important to consider. Who did absolutely amazing work during Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans? Who absolutely rescued the most number of people? Who got the best press? Who were really the stars of Katrina? What federal agency? Coast Guard, right? I'll tell you why. Every single member of the United States Coast Guard is authorized to talk to the media. Every seaman coming out of boot camp, seaman recruit, Brian Smith, is allowed to talk to the media as soon as he gets out of boot camp. He's allowed to say who he is, he's allowed to say what unit he's with, and he's allowed to say what he's doing right then, there, at that moment. And then he or she follows up with, and you probably need to talk to my public information officer, who is right over here, or who is at this place, or who can be reached at this phone number. But every single person in the Coast Guard is allowed to do that. As a result, you saw incredible press coverage for the Coast Guard. They've got some incredible software, they've got some really neat things. I really studied them because I wanted our team to be that way. I had a problem in the task force when we would show up on scene, all the firefighters on the team, and the task force is made up of firefighters from all over the state. As the media would show up on the team, they would jump in the van or they would move to a different area, or they would disappear, they'd lock themselves in their car. Because there's a tradition in the fire service, if you're seen on the evening news, what do you have to buy everybody at your station? Right, ice cream. And an 80-person urban search and rescue team, that's a significant financial investment that you don't want to make, considering there's also multiple news stations that are on scene. So we had this culture that my guys did not want to be on the TV. And as a result, the good news of what the task force was doing was not getting out there. I'm just one guy as the PIO. So I wasn't able to be on scene a lot of times, because we're spread out sometimes over the half of the state of Texas during floods or other things. So we started to shift. We started to do a shift in the culture at the task force, and we started to empower squad leaders and other members. You can talk about who you are. You can talk about where you're from. Say that you're from Garland Fire Department. Say that you're from Austin Fire Department, because that now is good. Your chief back home is beating his chest saying, that's my boy. He's out there. He's part of Texas Task Force 1, but by gosh, that's my Austin guy. He's part of that great team. And talk about what you're doing. It's okay to say that we're here on scene. We're going to try to rescue some folks. We've got swiftwater boats, or we're going to do a search of the area. That's okay. You're not giving away any information. Now, I certainly put limits on that, but it's okay for them to talk. So if you'll go with me for a little bit, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks. If you embrace this and you go back, these are some things to consider. Or if you find yourself on scene and the camera gets turned on and the light is there in your face and the reporter puts the microphone in your face, some things I'd like you to consider if you're authorized by your work to talk to the media. Social media is going to have to make you change your ways of communicating. You're going to have to look at having Facebook, Twitter accounts. You're going to have to look at blogs. You're going to have to look at putting this information out a lot faster, because if you don't put the information out, someone else will. I promise it's going to be out there. So what does the media want? Very important to consider this when they're coming to you. They are not out to get you. I've met a lot of reporters, and the vast majority of them do not want to skewer Brian Smith. They don't even know who I am. They don't have any axe to grind. They're not trying to get me. They want good information from someone. And in the absence of good information from a member of the team, they're going to find bad information from anybody. So consider that. Truly consider it. The story's going to be written. There is a house on fire. There is a person trapped in a tree from a flood. There is a missing Alzheimer's patient. They are going to get information. It's better that it comes from you. They don't want to look stupid. Reporters do not want to look stupid. They're generalists of everything. They're specialists in nothing. They're going to get really glazy when you start talking about gallons per minute, or you talk about wide area search patterns. They don't care about that stuff. They want generalist information. And also keep in mind, when you're on camera or you're talking with the media, you want to keep it at about a 10th grade level. You do not want to get into super jargon or anything like that. Keep it very basic. They want to make their editor happy. This is one of the key things to consider when you're talking with a reporter. They have a boss, and the boss is doing this on the phone to them. Why don't you have the story? Why don't you have more information? You've been on scene for an hour. Why don't you have more information? So I use this actually to my advantage. They want general, as I talked before, and they want to get a better media job. I use that again to my advantage. So what should we do? We should try to give the media what they want. I'm not saying give them every piece of information that is stored between your ears. That's not what I'm saying. Just give them some information. They're not the enemy. Now really, this is going to be a hard one. This was hard for me, I'll tell you. I'm the converted, so I'll tell you. I noticed in a couple of my first interviews that my body language was tense, that my answers were terse, that my general attitude toward the reporter was, I don't like you. And it was coming through the interview. Have you ever done that? You ever run into somebody, the mall, the movie theater, you're out with your wife, you're out with your husband, whatever, and you can feel it coming out of you. It's like coming out of your pores. It's like, man, do I smell like I don't like this person? And you can just tell that's happening. Well, that was me with the interview with the media. And I had to really change my mind. I had to really do a shift in my thinking that I can't treat them like the enemy because I'm not good at poker. I learned this back when I was in the Navy. I'm horrible at poker. I don't have a good poker face. So the media was picking up on this. So they thought I was hiding something. They thought there was something I wasn't giving them. It wasn't. I had all these things going through my brain. They're going to try to fry me. I'm going to lose my job, and all these things are going to go wrong. So I really had to kind of start changing the way I thought about them. And the way I did that is I took some of the energy out of their interview. I tried to shift it and get information from them. I started asking them questions. I didn't just stand there and let them start peppering me with information. As soon as they came up, I said, I'm so-and-so from Channel 6 or wherever. I said, oh, that's great. You probably have a number of questions for me. I tell you what, let me try to find out what you'd like to know. Let me ask you a couple questions. Do you want to interview somebody? No? Okay, you just want to get some basic information? Great. What kind of information do you want? Do you know about today? Do you want to know about the incident in general? Do you want to get some background on it? Do you want to talk to somebody who has more information about where we are, like the local public information officer? I'm from a state team or a federal team. I start asking these questions, and they're not going to videotape this, or they're going to maybe take a little bit of notes, but not really. But I start getting all this information from them. The power now starts to shift to me, right? Because I know what they want. And now I get to hold that over here. I get to hold that in my hand. I get to know what they want. I know what their motivations are. So now I can offer that as, well, hey, great, you want to do an interview? I want to find the right person. Hang on right here. Let me go get that person and get that set up to do the interview. Never lie to the media, ever. They'll get you. Just don't do it. Doesn't mean you have to tell them everything. Don't lie to them, though. They will get you every time. Help them find the info or the spokesperson. This is help them find the public information officer. It's okay to say, you know what? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but my public information officer is right over there, where he can be reached at this number. And they're not going to just keep haranguing you. Really what they want is information, so help them find that information. Ask them what they want. This really kind of takes them off guard. Older reporters, national reporters, they're used to this because generally they're being handled by someone, like if it's a high-level dignitary or it's a person that works in the federal government, they've got like a press secretary. They'll brief them, they'll talk to them beforehand and find out what they want to know. I do the same thing. I use the same exact tactic when I'm dealing with the media. Ask them if they have a deadline. This also puts a little bit of information in your court. Now you know that they have something they're working towards. Is it a 5 o'clock deadline? Is it a 10 o'clock news? Is it tomorrow morning? You're writing a newspaper article. So how long do I have to get the information that you want? Now they know that you understand what they're trying to do and what they're trying to get. So here's some discussion points. Whenever you're talking with the media, always make sure you stick with 3 main points. There's a lot of studies out there that if you try to go to 4, you try to go to 5, your message gets muddled. It gets lost. Stick with 3. It's okay to do 2, but 3 main points at the most is what you want to cover when you're doing any kind of interaction with the media. Repeat the question if necessary. This helps me frame up, in my mind, what the answer is going to be. It also makes a great sound bite. So if the question is, can you tell us how many swiftwater rescues you performed today? I do not want to say 3, right? Because that 3 can be used any way they want. What I would do is I would repeat the question. The number of swiftwater rescues that we've had today is 3. Now, I've got a clear, concise soundbite that they can take. They can chop that. They can't do a lot of editing to it. It's something that they're going to use. If I'm on camera, it's great. If it's not, it's just a quote that they're going to use, and they're going to put it in the newspaper. It's going to work great. So try to rephrase it. It also helps your brain kick into answering the question, and it gives you a little bit of time to reply. I use this a lot when I'm doing press conferences. It helps me frame up what I'm going to say. I don't know, but the person to ask is X. This is hard sometimes to do. You know, if you're a captain or lieutenant, you don't want to ever say you don't know. It's like impossible. You're not allowed to say I don't know, right? Answer somewhere. It's okay to say I don't know. I don't know. It's a disaster. There's chaos abundant. And they ask, how many units are on scene? I don't know. It's a great question. What I'll do is I'll find out and I'll get back to you. It's all right. It's not a sign of weakness to say you don't know. Talk about what you've done or what you're prepared to do. Just keep it very basic. Again, if your chief has given you permission to just basically talk to the media if they're on scene and you don't have a PIO, just talk about what you're doing. We got units on scene. We're going to try to assess the situation and determine the best course forward. Did I just say anything that could be used against me? Did I put out any information right there that would be bad? No. Very basic stuff. Try to always use positive statements. In case of a fire, use the stair. Stay calm. Negative statement would be don't use the elevator or don't panic. So this is important if you have to get out information about which way to evacuate, or if you want to tell people to boil their water. You want to say, make sure you boil your water. You want to stay away from something like, don't drink the water. Try to make that a positive statement whenever you can. Use bridging statements. This allows you to transition to what you want to talk to. When you've got those three main talking points, you want to stick to those when you're talking about a particular disaster. Bridging statements are going to allow you to transition to really the statement that you want to put out there. Allows you to say what you want. You can avoid no comment. You should never say no comment. Ever. Should never come out of your lips. Ever. There are 1,000 ways to say no comment. You just never want to say it. What does no comment imply? Guilt, right? We're preconditioned now with television and all these CSIs and dramas on television. No comment means guilt. There's 1,000 ways you can say no comment. If you come home at 10 o'clock at night and you were supposed to be there at 6 o'clock for dinner, and your spouse asks you, where were you? If you said, no comment, you're toast, right? There's all kinds of other stuff you can say. Use some bridging statements. So what are those? The most important thing to remember is that I made it home safe, honey. That I made it home safe to you and I got everything at the store that you needed. I actually said this to my wife about a month ago and she said, don't handle me. Do not handle me. I am not the media. Yes, dear. I'm sorry, dear. You're right. Another good bridging statement is the overall issue is we're working to determine the size and scope of the disaster. We're going to be working hard to determine what needs to be done. When we get more information, we'll get back to you. Another one is, I don't know the answer to that question, but what I do know is that we have units on scene. They're going to push information back to us, and as soon as we have more, we'll get it to you. It's our policy not to discuss X, but what I can tell you is we have units on scene. As we get more information, we'll let you know. See a trend here? I use this all the time if we're talking about injuries. It is our policy to never discuss injuries or deaths when we're doing a response. And we always push them to the proper authority that makes that decision. What I think you've asked is, and then follow on with an answer. This is a great bridging statement. Robert McNamara used this to great effectiveness. He was the Secretary of Defense under John F. Kennedy. He was in charge of DOD when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. He has a great quote. He says, don't answer the question they asked, the media asked. Answer the question you wish they asked. If you go back and you look at his transcripts, you look at his interviews, he does it all the time. They ask a particular question, but he talks about what he wants to talk about. Politicians are great at this, right? And I want to encourage all of you, when you're watching the news, when you're watching politicians, try to look at national level politicians. State senators and state representatives are okay at this, but national senators, national figureheads, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Homeland Security, stuff like that, President, Vice President, they're very good at talking about what they wanted to talk about. And it's really an art form. It's something that when you start paying attention to it, you can say, oh, wow, he didn't answer that question at all. But they make it seem like they did. What I'm really here to discuss is X. This is pretty blatant. This is kind of right in your face. This is, you know what, I'm not even going to answer that question. What I'm here to talk about is the good stuff we're doing. Do you have anything else to add? This comes at the end of an interview. This will be a question that a reporter will add. This is not your chance to throw in a little stab or a little jab or whatever. This is your chance to go back and hit one of those three main talking points that you didn't get. You almost always get it at the end. It's a softball that you should hit right out of the park. Any questions? A lot of information. Does anybody in here have a little bit of a shift in their mindset about the media?
Might not want to admit it to everyone.
A little bit? Okay, questions with anything for John or myself? No, you're not. And they're always going to move up. They're going to start small, and they're going to work their way up to bigger stations or bigger newspapers. They always want to move up. And it's impossible to go to a big city right out of college as a reporter, or junior college if they got a degree in journalism. So you're really going to be training the police beat or the fire beat. You're going to be retraining those folks. Every year and a half, you'll get some new folks in. But it's vital that you create those relationships.
I think they're moving, the turnover's so high because he's making them successful.
You're right.
With the way he's handling them.
They're writing good stories. And
that's right, they're writing good stories.
You're going to get that, but it's vital to build that good rapport with them and to establish some brownie points, because then if they know you, they trust you, they know that you're going to give them the information, it may take you a little bit of time. You've earned up that trust, and then you can call in a favor and say, look, I need you to not push me on this, give me an hour. Let me find out so I can get you the right information. It's going to really pay off in the long run.
Yes. You bet you can. Well, it's not math, right? It's always going to be sort of a subjective opinion. But if you are step number one is just to be aware of the fact that the way I carry myself, the way I'm interacting with people is huge. If you just start by becoming more aware of that, you'll start getting better. One of the things I do with my students is I videotape them a lot. And we sit down in my office and watch. I've had tears before in my office. And we pause and we rewind and we say, how could you have done this better? And we compare presentations that they've made or different experiences that we have that I videotape. And so that they just start becoming a little more aware, just plugging in a little bit to how they're impacting people. The other thing is, and this is hard, I tell my students, you've got to become a feedback junkie. You've got to seek out feedback, and our tendency is not to. Sometimes we don't want to hear it, right? But you've got to create, first of all, you've got to create an environment where people feel free to give you feedback. That step is hard. There's a lot of situations where I'm not going to tell the boss that he just screwed up. I'm not going to tell him that he just came off abruptly to that reporter or whatever. But if you create the environment in which people know, not that they're just at liberty to start giving you criticism all the time, but if you ask them, they're going to give you honest feedback and they're not going to get punished for it. I think that's helpful. You've got to seek out feedback. We are all, by human nature, we're all somewhat delusional about ourselves. I mean, that might sound a little strange, but it's true if you think about it. We can only know the world through our own eyes. We can't know really how people are taking us. But the more we strive to do that, the more open we are to feedback, the more we pay attention to it and do things like watching ourselves on video, I think the better you get. Hope that was helpful. Okay. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's fine. Anybody else? Questions? We are, certainly. And the Mays Business School is really embracing it. We see it as a way to push out pictures and information. And it's just a little bit of information. It's something as simple as we redesigned our rubble pile at Disaster City, or we did some canine training this weekend. Here's some information about our canines. It doesn't have to be just during a disaster. It could be as much as, the guys at Station 6, worked on whatever training today. And you think that's not that interesting? There's a lot of people that find that stuff interesting. Not just your internal audiences like other fire departments or other members of your fire department, but also external folks. They see that as important. You can really set up all kinds of little messages that you just push out. And you'll be surprised people pay attention to that. At least once a month you could say pull left, or pull right for flashing lights, or check your batteries in your smoke detector. Burn ban is still in effect. That kind of stuff. Engage with them. You got to have information on social media or people aren't really going to pay attention. And it doesn't have to be earth-shattering. It can just be little stuff. It's okay.
It's also just getting in the habit. It's getting accustomed to controlling the message yourself.
I do a whole lot more posting on Facebook and Twitter with the task force than I do with my own personal stuff. I guess because I have to do it for work, I just stay away from it with my own personal stuff. So I've had the same profile picture of my own account since I think Facebook was invented. People give you a hard time all the time about that. But It's not hard. It's not rocket science either. And you may make a little mistake. That's okay. Do it, because if you're putting the information out there, that means there's something being said, and you're staying relevant. You'll see a small-town reporter write a very short story about a wildfire maybe that's going on, and that'll be picked up by the AP, it'll be picked up by Reuters, and that's going to be covered worldwide by what young two-year kid right out of college wrote, for their hometown newspaper. It's a lot cheaper for them to buy that or contact that newspaper and say, hey, can I use that? New York Times isn't going to send somebody out for a small fire, in the middle of Texas. Now, if it gets huge, some of the stuff, Buffy, you were dealing with out there in your area a couple years ago, you may start to see national media, but it's cheaper now just to buy the story from a small paper.
Something else that we have not covered is thinking about, if the cameras are there, what's in the background if you're in an interview, and your ability to control that, right? So if I'm a reporter and I come up to Brian to interview him, and there's something happening behind him that Brian doesn't want on the scene, or want on the news, so what do? I walk up as a reporter. What do you do?
Well, I tell you what, let's get in a safe place to make sure that you're not in danger of something going on. We've got an active fire ground here. You probably have to get your story in by what, 6 o'clock tonight?
Yeah.
10 o'clock tonight, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, we'll make sure we get exactly the right information. Would you want to interview somebody?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I tell you what, over here, I'm going to go ahead and set up something where,
Yeah.
see what just happened? Now, if the camera's on me, I've got the background I want. I don't have the background, which is the active fire scene, where I got the guys on the second floor come bailing out of the window, right? The way that we do it is you always have one primary public information officer that's going to talk. I do have notes. I actually have a form that I fill out, and it is prescriptive with the who, what, when, where, how, what happened, how many of my personnel are involved, how long have we been on scene, some basic facts about what's going on. And I'll fill that out before every time I do the press conference or I deal with the media. If I'm on the phone, I'll just have those notes in front of me. But I have a folder actually that I keep it in, and I've got about 20 blank ones in my 3-ring binder, and I just flip to it and start writing that stuff down before I talk. The other thing I also have is after every media interview, I do a quick summary of what I talked about. I put down the 3 main talking points that I discussed with them, and I write down the questions that they asked, and if I have time, I put down what my response was. That's my catch. For later, if the story is wrong, I can go back and say, well, nope, actually, here's what I said.
How
here's
about
what I
notes
did.
on camera? Having your notes when you're on camera.
Yeah, it's okay. I like a podium better because then it's a little more controlled, but I generally hold them down. But I will pull them up and I'll look at them. You don't want them here. You don't want to read them, from this point, but it is good to have them because you look organized when you have notes. If you just shoot from the hip, unless you're really good at it, you may not come off the right way. So, and as far as introducing folks, the way I always have folks introduce themselves. So if I'm there with Texas Forest Service, myself, Texas Department of Health, FEMA team, something like that, I always have them introduce themselves and their title. That way I don't get the name wrong, something like that. Did that answer your question? So I'm Brian Smith, Public Information Officer for Texas Task Force 1, State Urban Search and Rescue Team. We're here working with the local jurisdiction to help them search the area, perform rescues, whatever. I'm always in a local jurisdiction, and I'm always working for the local jurisdiction. I never want to steal thunder, ever, as a state team. Never want to take away the thunder and the good job that the local fire department is doing, ever. I have failed if any media gets that perception. So that's just a little plug for me and my team. Bring us in, we'll work really hard for you, and we will not steal your thunder, I promise. Anybody else? We right on time?
Thanks for your time today, folks. Appreciate it.